Well, good morning to you. I hope that you have had a wonderful morning so far. It is great being with the family of God. It's great to be with our family together, isn't it? I do need to go ahead and confess to you and maybe relent. Last week, as I did the welcome, I talked about how we take joy from others in their joys. We celebrate with those who celebrate. We think about the births that have happened recently, and we were so excited about seeing those children grow. We think about those that have graduated and have gone through the process of education, and we celebrate that hard work, or maybe someone gets a job promotion, or we celebrate because that's what we're supposed to do as a family. But then I asked the question, are there times when someone's difficulties also can be a joy? You say, well, Scott, that doesn't make sense. We're supposed to mourn those difficult times. But there are times when we have a group of people from church decide to go camping. And they invite you, and because of your schedule, you can't go. And then you find out there's a huge rainstorm coming. And you take joy in that you're not there, setting up or experiencing camping in the wet. So I said that in the welcome last week, and I want you to know, before I stepped out of the pulpit, my phone was blowing up. It was a bzz, bzz, bzz. I thought I had some kind of band around my ankle. It was blowing up of all the people at the campground that wanted to make sure that I knew that it wasn't raining. I want you to know, Scott Tillman, that it is a beautiful day out here. Well, I rejoice in that as well. And we're glad that those that camped last week are back with us this week as well. My good friend Don Hudson, we've been friends for a long time. He does like to text me during a certain athletic event that I enjoy watching. And I believe now for 18 years, I will normally get a text at the most crucial time of that athletic event where he is in dire need of assistance. It started 18 years ago, where I actually had made it out to my vehicle and I was heading to help him change a flat tire on the interstate during the middle of the game. Thank you, buddy. So this week we've come into chapter 5 in the story, and I hope that you are keeping up with a reading from the story. We as a church family are really going through the entire Bible with 31 weeks as we read this. Really, it's more like a narrative. It's more like a novel as we read through Scripture. And this week we've come to new commands and a new covenant. It covers Exodus 19 through 40. And if I were to summarize it, I would say that God is establishing the way his people are to relate to him and to each other. I really think it's important before we jump into our study that we remember that the Israelites have only been out of captivity now for, we believe, 2 months. It's the first day of the 3rd month that they have escaped bondage in Egypt, that they have fled, that they have been led by Moses even through the waters. They had been enslaved for 400 years prior to that. It's because of that fact that God gives commands designed to lead his people to a life of practical holiness, to understand how to live a life outside of bondage, outside of slavery. In these laws, the people could see the nature of God and his plans on how they should live. Now, in Egypt, they lived constantly surrounded by idolatry. As a matter of fact, if you'll do much of a study on the 10 plagues, what you'll find out that there was an Egyptian god that was defeated with each and every plague. As a child, I thought they were just annoyances, nuisance. Gnats, oh, I hate gnats. Frogs, why frogs? But to come to find out that there was an Egyptian god, it was a systematic approach of not only freeing God's people, but destroying the idolatry that they had come to know through 400 years of living under their rule. But you need to understand, aren't we creatures of habit? And don't we tend to revert back to the things that we have known? Even after receiving the 10 Commandments, God's people were not able to fulfill their end of the agreement. Clearly, they and we need someone to renegotiate the contract. We're all in need of a Savior, Jesus Christ. And so for us to fully understand the events that happened in this section in chapter 5 of the story and here in Exodus 19 through 40, I think we have to look at it through the lens of the cross. To fully understand the Old Testament, you have to have some idea of what's going on in the New Testament, or it may seem, just as those 10 plagues seemed when I was growing up, a little scattered. I don't know if any of you really enjoy this season. It's my favorite. I love the fall. There's so many reasons why I love the fall. I love the change of colors of the trees. I love when the temperatures get cooler. I don't know what's going on right now, but hopefully it's coming soon. I love that there's holidays coming up like Thanksgiving where we meet together and Christmas. I don't know if any of y'all grew up like I grew up, and for some reason during this time of year, it's important that you buy a large puzzle. And for some reason, there's going to be a table in your home where that puzzle is scattered out, these thousands of pieces, and you're supposed to, as you walk by, stop, look for a minute, and put one piece in, and then continue on your merry way. How many of you do that? Now, the one great thing that the puzzle makers have done is given us a picture of the puzzle on the front of the box. And so we can look at the box and we can see what the picture is supposed to look like, correct? But now imagine this. What if I gave you a white box with 5,000 pieces of this jigsaw puzzle, but it didn't have a picture of what the puzzle is supposed to look like when it's completed? I guess what you would start trying to do is find the edge pieces. We'll see if we can connect. And if you find a corner piece, you feel like you found gold. Woohoo, corner. But there will be some confusion as you're trying to put together this picture of which you have no idea what it's going to come out to be. When we don't look at the Old Testament through the lens of Jesus, that's exactly what we're doing. We're just wondering, what could this picture be? But with the lens of the cross, we have a picture on the box. We can understand God's constant pursuit for covenant with his people. I need to say that again for you. We can understand God's constant pursuit for covenant, relationship, meaningful relationship with his people. And so as we think about this passage that we've studied this week, we have to think about another mountain peak experience as well. And so this morning we're going to look at two different mountain peak experiences. Before we do that, let me ask you the question, why mountains? Why mountains? The Great Smoky Mountains National Park ranks number one of the most visited national parks in America. In 2020, over 12.1 million visitors were drawn to the allure of the beautiful mountains and the taste of caramel apples and saltwater taffy. We all have walked up and down those streets, seen the same things that have been in those stores for 50 years. When we go to the mountains, what we're really in search for is awe. A-W-E. We're in search for a reminder of how small we really are in this life. And more importantly, how small we are, how big God is. About 20 years ago, I took a mission trip to Tuba City, Arizona, and we lived at a Navajo reservation for a week, building a church. One day, we decided to take a short drive to see the Grand Canyon. It was the first time I'd ever experienced the Grand Canyon. And I remember as we come into this section on the south rim of the Grand Canyon, there's a welcome center there, and I stood looking at this canyon that had been carved by this river. And my first thought was, how could you say that there's no God? How could you see this and say that there's no God? It reminded me what Paul said there in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, when he says creation itself is enough to know that God exists, to know that there's a great creator. It's enough when we see God's handiwork to know that he is real. It was a beautiful experience that I enjoyed very much until one of the members of our group went into the tour shop there, the gift shop, and decided to buy a book called Death at the Grand Canyon, and proceeded to read about all these people that had fallen off the edge of the cliff to their death. It ruined the trip for me after that. But haven't we all been in search of the all? That's why mountains. You know, if we really even look at the life of Christ, or at least the 3 years of his ministry, mountains were playing a pretty important role. It seems like after every major event in Jesus' ministry life, that he went to a mountain peak to be alone with his Father. So if you have your Bibles, turn over to Exodus chapter 24. And let's look at verses 15 through 18 that Coach Starks read for us this morning. Appreciate that so much. But I need you to keep your finger there, and we're going to turn here in just a minute to Mark chapter 9 that Michael did such a nice job reading with our communion. Here in Exodus 24, when Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, and on the seventh day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looks like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Wow. Can you imagine the scene? We've seen clouds with that smoky, that we've seen mountains that have been covered by those smoky clouds, haven't we? But this was more than that. It said that they looked like it was a consuming fire. And Moses went into it. I wonder if you'd have been brave enough to go into it. I wonder if I would have been brave enough to go into it. But you see, God had a plan from the beginning. It wasn't the first time that he had spoke to Moses, was it? You see, God had prepared him for such a time as this. God knew what he was doing. God had put his plan into motion. And so Moses was prepared for his encounter. Now, if you go over to Mark chapter 9, we see there's another encounter on a mountain peak. Starting in verse 2, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him. Suddenly, they looked around. They no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them the orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Wow, as the scene unfolds, can you only imagine? Jesus' 3 closest friends on earth, Peter, James, and John, go with him. They knew he liked mountains. It was no secret. But were they prepared for what they were about to encounter? The voice of God in a cloud. Moses and Elijah. And the confirmation of what they had been wondering now for 3 years. Who is this man? Could he be the Messiah? Could he actually be the Son of God? That confirmation came. And so as we look at these 2 stories, I think it's important that we compare them and we look at them side by side. And I want to draw some parallels from the story. Again, with the mindset of the lens of Jesus as we understand what the Old Testament means. Here are 8 things that I think are parallels. You may see more, but these are the 8 that I have seen. Both events are situated on high mountains. The mountain of Sinai and a high mountain north of Israel. In both events involve Moses, and more specifically, involve God speaking to Moses. Both events reveal the glory of God in the form of a cloud. Both events transpire with respect to 7 days. Both divine encounters include God speaking from the cloud. The Lord's voice in Exodus 24 leads to the instruction about the tabernacle. Now you need to understand the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a tent where God was going to live with his people and like his people. The tabernacle was a tent that was created for God to live like his people and with his people. And there in Mark 9, God identifies Jesus as his son, whom is living with his people and like his people. Both events have other witnesses. We're told that Moses had Joshua with him. We know that he left him behind and climbed a little higher in the mountain. Jesus ascends with Peter, James, and John. In both incidences, those who saw and heard were meant to share with others. And it seems like both events were meant to lead people to understand the glory of God. Both events lead to a discussion on the dwelling place for God, where he resides. And both events are followed by chaos in the valley below. After receiving the stone tablets and the instructions for the tabernacle, Moses returns to the golden calf. Similarly, Jesus returns after the transfiguration to an argument about a young boy that's possessed by a demon. Maybe one of my favorite lines from someone in all the New Testament is that boy's father. Jesus comes down the mountain. Again, his disciples, they're arguing. They can't heal this boy that's possessed. And they run up to Jesus. You see the story unfold, don't you? You know the way that we run up to our parents when we were young, when they needed to fix something. And finally, the man who is at his wit's end strolls up, and Jesus is saying, what's going on? And the man says, Rabbi, if you can do anything. Jesus stops him in the middle of his tracks and says, If? Now remember what just happened on the mountaintop. He was transformed. He was confirmed. And the man says the most powerful words that I often pray. God, I believe. Help my unbelief. I believe. Help my unbelief when I fall, when I'm uncertain, when I allow the circumstances of life to overwhelm me. Help my unbelief. What I really think Jesus is thinking about is you don't even realize that you're in awe, that you're in the presence, that you're on the mountain peak, and he heals the boy. And can you imagine the story for that family's life from then on? Wouldn't you love to know, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story? Guess what? One day we will. We'll hear that story of how that young boy proclaimed Jesus Christ. We'll hear that story how a man who was hopeless found hope in Jesus. One day we'll hear that story. Aren't you excited about hearing the stories that are unfinished? That puzzle piece that's been laid in that puzzle. And you're one of those pieces just as well. So I saw 8 parallels in these two passages. It's clear to me that there are connections, that God meant for one to be viewed through the lens of the other. But the question then means is, so what? How does this apply to me and to my walk? What do these two stories tell us about the character of God? So here are the three things that I think I want to leave you with. Number one, God is in constant pursuit of a covenant relationship with his people. God is in a constant pursuit of a relationship with his people. In Psalm 139, verses 7 and 8, it says, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where shall I flee your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there." Number two, God will never leave us nor forsake us. He is always with us. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God said, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." For you to understand that passage, you need to understand the Hebrew writer is looking at the love of money as an idol that we are worshiping, just as the Israelites worshiped a golden calf, not realizing that they had God right there. And then finally, we as children should always seek mountaintop experiences. If we'll only open our eyes to be in awe in the presence of God. As Isaiah 2:2, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. I love the mountains. I love their beauty. I'm in awe of their beauty and, more importantly, of their Creator. Let's seek that experience as we seek to understand that God is with us always. And I want you to know you can have the presence of God with you always by accepting Jesus Christ. Today, you could turn your life over to Christ and be dipped in the waters of baptized, and you can come out of that water transformed, whiter than snow, filled with his presence, and you too can be in awe. If we can help you in any way, won't you come while we stand and sing?